Hi, my name is Brad Emery, and I just wanted to use this opportunity to give a little more explanation about my time as a mentor to a student teacher and what that looked like as far as my classroom management plan, since that was one of the primary reasons that I was chosen as a mentor. So, a little bit of background. In my third year of teaching, I was approached by my principal, and he came to me in the fall and asked if I would be willing to have a student teacher coming that spring. And to say I was surprised would probably be an understatement. I wouldn't have expected anything like that, and I guess it showed on my face because he explained that he wanted this student teacher to see what a well-run classroom looked like. He appreciated my classroom management, the way that I worked with challenging students, and how that played out. And then he also wanted her to experience the third grade classroom as a different example she was going into, or it was going into, and is now a preschool teacher. So he wanted her to have a different experience in that sense as well. And so he asked her to be a part of my classroom. Um, I was honored. I was surprised. I felt a little bit not ready. I certainly didn't feel like I was probably qualified. There were a lot of other veteran teachers and are a lot of veteran teachers in our school that have taught for many more years and are far better teachers than I am. So I wanted to take this as an artifact because from an administrative perspective, I want to make sure that I'm reflecting and looking at not only why did my administrator choose me, but how can I use this practice and use what I had to offer that student teacher as an administrator as well. So diving right in, since classroom management was one of the things that was brought up and highlighted as something that I had a strength in, I will just take a minute and go over the classroom rules that I still have and that I use to keep an eye on kids and really to help them be successful. So they're pretty simple, and a lot of people like to do fancy classroom rules and involve kids and things, and I don't. I don't think there's anything wrong with that per se, but my rules right here are exactly how they're posted in the classroom. They're short, sweet, simple, and I make sure to go over them with students. We spend about 2 weeks at the beginning of the year running through these in detail and modeling and acting out and making sure we understand what they are, why we have them, and what the consequences look like as well. So, rule number one, we listen and follow directions. Rule number two, you raise your hand before speaking and leaving your seat. Now, this one I do tweak slightly each year. There were some years that I removed that leaving your seat. At the third grade level, I just emphasize to the students there are appropriate times to leave your seat, and there are times when you need to remain seated, and they do a pretty good job of managing that on their own. So sometimes I take that off. Rule number three is keep your hands and feet to yourself. Number four is respect your classmates and your teacher. So these all work together to really cover any sort of misbehavior that might pop up in the classroom. And that's the goal with these, is they're a big umbrella rule. Now, I'm not a big fan of little detail rules like when you can and can't sharpen your pencil and what the consequences are for that, because that all falls under this larger umbrella, and I look at it from a perspective of I'm going to manage that with procedures and routines rather than putting a rule for that. That way, our rules are there for a very specific purpose. And I make sure to communicate to the students what is the purpose of our rules and our consequences, which we'll get to in just a moment. The purpose is that all students are here to learn. And so these rules respect every student's right to learn and their peers' right to learn. So when you break one of these rules, you're either preventing yourself from learning or you're preventing someone around you, a peer, from learning. And kids really latch onto this pretty well. And I make it a point to go through this multiple times through the year so that they understand the rules aren't here just to punish you. They're not here to kill fun. These rules are in place so that you can have fun, so that you can have the freedom to be a part of a classroom that you love and that you learn to love learning. Because that's why we're at school. Ultimately, I want kids to leave my classroom loving learning. And so I use these rules to provide the framework for them to do that. Now, all of these rules, these consequences, I took them, used them, appropriated them from a man named Michael Linson, and he has a website called Smart Classroom Management. Don't know if it's .org or .com, but it's Smart Classroom Management. He has a ton of fantastic tips and advice, and so I follow his plan and his procedures almost to a T, and they've served me exceptionally well. Um, and the consequences, you'll notice there's not much to them. First consequence, if you break one of these rules, you get a warning. This isn't a glare. It's not a threat of things to come. It's simply what it sounds like. It is purely a warning. I'll tell the student, you've broken rule number 2. You didn't raise your hand before calling out, and that's it. And the goal of that warning is for the student to be aware, whoops, I made a mistake. I prevented myself or someone else from learning, and then to fix their action. And that's exactly how I explain it to students. And then the second consequence is a timeout. So if you break another rule, I'm going to tell you the rule and ask you to move to a different desk that's away from the other students. And you need to be there for at least 10 minutes so that you have a break and a time to process what you did and why that's a problem. And that usually gives kids, if they get worked up, which doesn't happen a ton. There's some students that struggle with that more than others and kind of react poorly when given a consequence like that. That gives them the break to cool down. But for most students, that's purely a time so that they can get away from whatever was causing them to be a distraction or to be distracted, and they can refocus and make sure that they're ready to learn. And then they have the option of when they rejoin the class. And I've had students that take advantage of that timeout seat, and they'll use it for 30 minutes or 40 minutes or an hour or the whole morning. In some cases, I've got one this year that will take advantage of it for about half the day because he gets worked up. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not meant to be a punishment. It's meant to be a consequence and an opportunity for them to get back in the right mindset so that they're not distracting themselves or others and they can learn. And side note, I do have some students that once they get the hang of this, they will actually ask if they can move themselves prior to getting a timeout. If they know I'm going to have trouble and I am going to end up in this timeout area, can I please move myself before I hit that second consequence? And I always am very happy when students have that sort of self-regulation. That's just one of the many perks of these rules in this plan. Third consequence, if you come back from that timeout and you're still having trouble and break another rule during the day, you're going to go to timeout for the rest of the day just so that you can have that space and your classmates can have the space, and then you are going to get a letter home. It's nothing fancy. I didn't load that up here, but I'll add that to my artifacts folder in case anyone wants to see it. But that's purely a letter that says, here's your student. It's got the date. They broke one of the rules, and I have my 4 rules, and I just put a little X next to it. Very rarely do I write anything with that. It's just an acknowledgement that something has been broken, and then it has a statement that it reminds parents if or the school rules are in place to ensure that all students learn and are successful at school. And please acknowledge that you have seen this by signing and sending it back the next day. And so I know a lot of people look at that and they think, well, you didn't do anything. What does that letter do? You're not telling parents details or anything. Well, that's where students take the responsibility. And I have students take that responsibility of explaining what happened and why did you get this letter home? And so they can run through that with parents. And it's really amazing to see when you give a kid the responsibility of owning up to their own actions and explaining the how and the why and what they're going to change. Kids really own that. And that's really the core of these rules. They seem so simple. They seem like they wouldn't work. But the leverage that comes behind it is your relationship with the kids. So my kids in my classroom come first. And so the reason I have these rules truly is, it's not just a gimmick. It's not just something I say. I want these kids to love learning. I love to learn. I want the kids to have that same love for learning that I do. And so because of that, it's easy for me to make a connection with them and really build relationships in such a way so that they see that's who I am. That's my honest desire for them. And when they see that, when they understand that you care about them enough to hold them to rules like this, to hold them to a system of accountability so that they have that opportunity to learn, it's fantastic and it's amazing to watch kids rise to meet that. So how does all this tie in for administration? Why am I putting this in a video for my master's course? Well, goes back to that student teaching experience, because that for me was the point at which I realized there's value in good classroom management. There's value in caring enough about students to hold them to a set of rules, no matter where they're from, no matter what they left at home, no matter what they happened to them before they walked into my door, no matter what was like last year. And that's where my administrator noticed and acknowledged that I can handle difficult students and that they succeed and they do well in my classroom. And that's not bragging on myself. That's purely what students will do when you give them the opportunity to succeed and you have a structure and a framework that lets students be successful and lets them own their own actions. And that's what this is. So that's what my goal was to communicate to my student teacher. And that's my goal as a future administrator, that this is what I want my teachers to know. I want them to know that when you have that relationship with students, where you truly care about them, and you're not just trying to get through the day, but you really have a passion for them to grow as people. And you can honestly say, even that most difficult student who drives me nuts, that I can say, I do care about that student and I'm going to approach him or her with the perspective that they can be successful if I let them have that responsibility, if I treat them like any other student in my class, I hold them to the same expectations. I'm going to follow through with the same consequences. I'm going to give them that same opportunity. It's really just astounding to watch kids rise up and meet that. And it's not easy. This year has been particularly difficult for me. And I've had COVID has thrown off the way that I normally teach and the level and the time that I spend on my classroom management. And I can testify to you, it has made a very big difference. My classroom management hasn't been as strong because I didn't hit this hard. And I didn't take the time to set this all up in place. And I have run tired. I've got some remote learning students, so I've got a hybrid environment. And all that has caused me to not hold to this plan 100% of the time. I'm saying, honestly, I'm probably more at like an 80-20, where 80% of the time I'm good to catch students and hold them to these rules, and 20% of the time I'm not. And honestly, that's wreaked havoc. I've had more struggles with management this year than I've ever had in any other year of my teaching. And I really do believe that that's because I'm not practicing what I've told my students. I'm not practicing what I was noticed for and given a responsibility as a student teacher mentor for. And rather than holding those kids to these rules 100% of the time, I've let that slide and it's caused problems. So bringing that back into an administrative role, I want to make sure that as an administrator, I'm leading by example, that I hold all students in the school to the same standards, to the same expectations, that we all are capable of succeeding and of success, and these are not too difficult for any student. These are not out of reach of any student. And the moment I start thinking that way, the kids see it and they will respond accordingly. So as a principal, I hope to be able to really just soak my teachers in this idea of all students can achieve this. All students can work within these parameters and can function as successful, happy students when you believe they can and when you hold them to it. So that's why I chose my classroom management plan and my time as a student teacher mentor. So thank you.